Hello, friends. This is a public service announcement for the podcast that you're listening to. In May of 2023, I created ABCs of Parenting Adult Children in Liberty and Gun Rights podcast. In December of 2024, I joined the Podmatch Podcast Network in Florida, which provides me as a host with the tools and information I need to create a quality podcast. One of the tools that I get by being a part of the Podmatch Network is quality guests who I interview on these episodes. Doing this provides us with quality content that you listen to. I release a new episode on both podcasts on Friday morning at 8 a.m. You can listen to these audio episodes on Captivate.fm, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and Public Radio. You can watch the video episodes on Rumble.com, which is a conservative version of YouTube. Up until this point, I have provided this content free of charge because I want to make sure that the listening audience did not have to pay a subscription cost to listen or watch these episodes. Instead of converting this to a subscription service, I want to provide you with a way to support these podcasts through donations at PayPal. If you open up a web browser and go to https://paypal.me/James Moffitt. That's JamesMoffitt. That's paypal.me/James Moffitt. Or within PayPal itself, the app, you can send me a donation to jcmoffitt@icloud.com. That's jcmoffitt@icloud.com. I understand that paying for multiple subscriptions to listen to podcast episodes can be expensive and cost prohibitive. I currently pay for several podcast host subscription services to provide this content for both podcasts to you. Any donations will be used to underwrite those costs. Thank you for listening, and please enjoy the following podcast episode. Hello and welcome to Liberty and Gun Rights Podcast. My name is James Moffitt, and I will be your host. Today we have a special guest. Evan, I know how to say your first name, but how do you say your last name?
Jaqua.
Jaqua. Evan Jaqua. Evan, thank you for being here.
A pleasure. A true honor.
How are you doing?
I'm doing just great. I'm really happy to be here. I'm looking forward to a very interesting and vibrant conversation.
Yeah. So where are you located?
Well, I've actually spent most of the last 20 years in South America, and that's sort of where I've been mainly headquartered over, like I said, the last almost 2 decades. But presently I'm in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So are you originally from South America, or are you originally from America?
I'm actually born in Los Angeles and lived here till I was in the United States, for the most part, till I was in my mid-20s. And then I moved to Japan, lived there for many years, actually graduated from a Japanese graduate school. I lived in China for a bit, and then have spent many years in South America. So, yeah, I've been around.
Wow. Yes, indeed you have. So introduce yourself to the listening audience, please.
Okay, well, James, my name is, as you introduced me, my name is Evan Jaqua. I'm working with some others to start what we call the Solutions Party. It's not an actual official party yet, but we're working to get it there. And I should probably give you just a little bit of background. As I mentioned, I've lived around the world in many different places, had many different conversations about the different problems that or challenges that people around the world have, and find a lot of commonality, actually. And we've had a lot of interesting ideas that we've discussed over the years. And what we have at our website, our blog, solutionsparty.org, is sort of a summary of a lot of different ideas that I thought were very good and that I'm hoping that people will buy into. So just to kind of give you a nutshell of what the Solutions Party is all about, Ronald Reagan said that government isn't the solution, government is the problem. We happen to believe it should be a little more specific. We believe that politicians are the problem. Specifically, the human brain is a wonderful thing, but one of the problems with the human brain is it gets addicted to things very easily. It gets addicted to drugs, alcohol, tobacco, video games, social media, you name it. But probably the most addictive thing of all is power. And the problem is that once people get power, they do not want to give it up. And it becomes the priority, staying in power. And we see this around the world. We've seen it throughout history. I mean, this is why the Syrian dictator would dump barrel bombs on civilians, or why the North Korean dictator sends entire families to gruesome prison camps. But how it affects us here is that, as George Will, the conservative columnist, said, he said there's not a dime's difference between Democrats and Republicans in that their first priority is staying in office. Now, I don't know about you, but frankly, I don't think we'd be sending our representatives to have their first priority to stay in office, any more that if you hired somebody for a 4-year contract and they spent half the time on the job just playing politics to get a contract extension, I don't think you'd be too happy. Right. So we feel that the first step that needs to be done to really get our politics working for us again is we have to get rid of the whole concept of re-election. When I say it's not even term limits, as the famous economist Thomas Sowell said, what you have to do is you have to make it one term limited, and you also have to put a waiting period, because if you don't have a waiting period, then people will use their present office as a springboard for their upcoming election.
So can we back up just a little bit?
Of course.
Okay. I want to read this paragraph because I think it's a great foundation to jump off of.
Okay.
And everything you're saying is great. Evan Jaqua brings a global perspective to the current state of democracy and politics, emphasizing the need for reform to ensure freedom and prosperity. This episode could explore how systemic changes can align with constitutional liberties, engaging listeners who value the U.S. Constitution and individual freedoms. And as you know, Liberty and Gun Rights podcast is a little bit about liberty, a little bit about gun rights here in South Carolina and in America in general. But as the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights is our foundation here in America, liberty is something that maybe we take for granted, maybe not. And I would love to define what liberty is. When I read your profile, I was like, wow, this, and since you said you've been in Japan, you're in South America, you've been here, you've been in China, you obviously have a very well-rounded global perspective about a lot of these things. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast.
Well, as I say, I'm honored to be here. And one of the things that we try to talk about on our blog is that our problems, our challenges are multifaceted, and requires a multifaceted approach. It's not just about putting term limits on, it's also about reforming the whole notion of political parties, because our political parties have just gotten way too tribal and driven more by lies and emotional manipulation, as opposed to being a competition of ideas, which is what our democracy, our constitutional republic should be. It's a competition of ideas instead of tribal warfare that we have now.
Here's something that I have said in the past, and I want to say again, especially on this episode. We have a three-party system here in America, right? We have the Democrats, Republicans, and Libertarians, right? The Libertarians are, while it's a wonderful party, and I don't want to say anything negative about it, when it comes to election time, whoever has the most money and can get the most faces in front of a television camera is typically the Republicans or Democrats, right? So we're always forced to vote for the lesser of two evils, if you want to call it that, right? And so what, for 238 years, maybe give or take a few years and maybe off, we have two major parties that have agendas, right? And during the campaign, when they're campaigning for the office of the President of the United States, they talk about social issues. They talk about the economy, right? And you can jump in and correct me if I ever if I'm saying something wrong. But they talk about the economy. They talk about the border, making the border safe, healthcare, whatever the major talking points are, right? So they talk about all these major talking points, and they try to sell us on, hey, I'm the guy or the gal for the job, right? And then once they get elected, then all of a sudden nobody's trying to solve the social problems that we're having, right? They're all stuck on their individual agendas, right? And they talk about bipartisan politics, but how often does that really happen? Right.
Exactly. Yes.
So now you can go.
The thing is, a first-rate salesperson. Let's talk a little bit about sales, because I think this is a good analogy. A first-rate salesperson does not need to lie about their product or the service they're offering. They don't need to trash the competition, because they've got the confidence in what they're offering, and they can even talk respectfully about what the competition is offering, because they can make the case that their product or service is a better return on investment. Now, what's the other side of the coin, where you have fourth-rate salespeople, the sort of people who will say anything to make the sale? They'll lie about the competition. They'll lie about what they're standing for. And when you think about it, what we have now are really, our politicians are fourth-rate salespeople. Our elections have become not a real healthy competition of ideas, a respectful, civil competition of ideas. It's become a war of lies and emotional manipulation. I mean, this is one of the big weaknesses in our democracy is the fact that, as Winston Churchill said, what's the biggest argument against democracy is you just have a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. And one of the biggest problems is people are voting based on very skewed information that they're getting from things like attack ads or razzle-dazzle marketing ads, from just downright lies. And one of the big problems also with this is that our journalism, the state of our journalism is such a sorry state that people don't know what to believe. They don't know what's the truth. And this is something that also has to be addressed, because if you believe that the pen is mightier than the sword, as I do, then we should be making our robustness of our journalism, the moral equivalent of our national defense, because our national defense defends us against enemies from abroad, but our journalism has to defend us against from both enemies from within and without. And we have to put into place to have our journalism become credible again, and that's one of the things that we propose. So if we want to fix our democracy, we have to get rid of career politicians. We have to put a time limit on our political parties so they don't become tribalized or become tribal.
Right.
We have to put into place that you penalize politicians for lying either when they're trying to run for office or when they are in office. Just like, James, if I were an employee or if I were an interviewer, you were interviewing me for a job, right, and you caught me lying during the interview, you would have every right to kick me out of the interview. Right. And that's what we should do with our politicians. If we catch them lying during the campaign, that should be considered at least as bad as lying on a job interview. Or if we catch them lying once they're in office, just like if I were your employee and you caught me lying on the job, you would have every right to fire me. Well, there have to be things put into place to penalize our politicians when they lie, because when they lie, they are violating their sacred responsibility to keep the voters informed, because voters need to be accurately informed to make informed choices. So these are some of the things, the term limits.
How about violating their oath of office?
Yeah. I mean, you see, it's bad enough to get a job by lying, but right, to ask for the voters to give you for the sacred power of the people and doing so by lying, that has to be considered a very grave offense. And we can't just, the thing is you talk to some people and they'll say, well, gosh, that's just what politicians do. Politicians lie. Well, we shouldn't accept that. Just like, right, 3,000 years ago it was okay for a man to beat his wife, or, throughout history, people thought, well, slavery is just something that people do. Well, we can't let ourselves just say, well, that's politicians being politicians. We've got to expect that they're going to adhere to much higher standards of behavior.
Right. So I got a question for you. How do you know a politician's lying?
Well, that's one of the big problems right now. That's one of the big problems. That's why we need to have robust journalism that can do accurate fact-checking. And when I say fact-checking, it has to be sort of like a Rotten Tomatoes model. But just like if you want to see, if a movie has been well reviewed, you go to Rotten Tomatoes and they have a whole series of different reviewers who evaluate a movie. Well, we could have a whole series of fact checkers, which could be based on AI, for example, which could be, you want all of it based on AI. You want to have people who are credible, who can actually fact check, and then have some of these things backed up with AI so that you get as much of like I say, you want to have a variety of sources fact checking, then you take an average.
So something similar. You gave me the serious answer, so now I want to give you my silly answer.
Okay.
Their lips are moving.
Well,
that's deeply seated from a disgruntled voter.
Yes, exactly. We can turn this around if we, like I say, if we make our journalism, and there are ways. One of the ways we propose making the journalism credible again is to just like you certify doctors, you certify lawyers, you certify truck drivers, you certify database engineers. We have to start certifying our journalists and news organizations on one hand, and grading them based on things like neutrality, based on things like the reliability of their sources, based on the relevancy of their articles, because it's very critical that we start having what we call certified news sources. Because, for example, there was a fake audio of J.D. Vance, saying a lot of bad things about Musk. Well, Vance says that this is just AI generated stuff. And this is going to become a problem because deep fakes are going to become increasingly harder to tell the difference from real stuff. And so the question will be is if this audio is published on a certified news site, well, you can have a lot more confidence that they've done the research and have verified it to be true. But if it's on Joe Sixpack's, website, then you can probably just discount it as a deep fake. As deep fakes become more and more prevalent, it's ever more critical that we have robust, reliable journalism and certified news sites that we could go to. Now, this doesn't at all infringe on freedom of speech, because you can start a news site and say whatever you want. You just won't be certified.
Have you ever looked at Ground News?
I've heard of it.
It's Ground News, and I subscribe to it because it actually rates whether the news story was generated or supports either the left side or the right side or down the middle.
That's exactly, yes.
It's very, very, I think it's very, very intelligently put together. And of course, you have to have a little bit of, you have to kind of think for yourself, right?
Yes.
And so when you're reading these stories, you can kind of tell where they're coming from.
Right.
But it's interesting to see the percentage of whether Ground News thinks it's from the left or for the right or down the middle or whatever. So
right.
Yeah, it's a wonderful tool.
Well, let me just talk a little bit more about journalism, because it's so fundamental to.
Sure. Yes. Go ahead.
You see, the problem is that in the old days, when we were growing up, it was not easy to start a news site or a newspaper or a radio station, a news radio station, or a television, news program. It required a huge amount of investment for to start a newspaper. You had to have a printing press, you had to have journalists, you had to have a way to distribute it, you had to have an advertising department. It was a major task, but now any Joe with a laptop and a web page can start a quote unquote news site. So one of the big problems is that it's no longer a viable business anymore, conventional news. That's why so many of our major networks have shifted from major news to more emotion manipulation stuff to get people riled up, because that keeps people coming back for more.
Right.
Okay, so if we accept the notion that traditional news is no longer a viable business, but we need to have reliable news as a critical part of our national defense, then what we have proposed is that we start a national press fund into which the government can contribute, corporations contribute, individuals can contribute. And if you get a journalism degree, and you start writing articles, you'll automatically be qualified to get a monthly stipend from this national press fund. Now, why is this important? Because one of the biggest casualties of the new news era that we live in now is small town journalism has disappeared. And we need to have small town journalism, because these small town journalists help keep the local governments in check. They help keep the community together, community informed. And so we want to bring back small town journalism, and we want to have these journalists able to concentrate on their jobs and not having to worry about creating clickbait or whatever in order to earn a living. And so the amount you would get would be depending on your certified. And then, as I said, you'd have a grade. How well written are your articles? How neutral are your articles? How relevant are your articles? And if the more relevant, well-written, neutral articles you write, the more you'll be entitled to receive from this National Press Fund. So this is one of the things that we are proposing. And exactly what you said, Ground News, is we want to have things, evaluators like that, even professional evaluators who will have, in collaboration with AI programs, that will evaluate news articles. How well written is this? How neutral is it? The journalist or the news organization always gets low grades for the quality of their articles. They risk losing their certification.
Right. So can we go down memory lane for a little bit? Let's step back to the 60s and the 70s. Do you remember this guy named Walter Cronkite?
Of course.
And so what did he do? He just read the news, right? He didn't put a spin on it. It wasn't liberal. It wasn't conservative. It wasn't socialist. It wasn't anything.
Right.
He just read the news as it was and said goodnight. And so
exactly.
There was no spin doctors behind it. There was no agendas behind it. And now we've got NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, which I happen to like. I don't necessarily like his politics, but I like his methodology for delivering the news. And then you got Fox News, and you've got every variation on both sides of the fence, right?
Right. Well, the thing is back in those days when Walter Cronkite said, and that's the way it is, people believed it. And why is that? Because in those days, news could be a real business, and they didn't have to worry about trying to get people hooked on the news like
Right.
we do
Right.
now, which when we say news, it's like I say, it's more emotion manipulation. It's, the idea is to provide the skewed information that riles people up and keeps them coming back. And that's one of the great problems with our journalism. In fact, one of the former Australian Prime Minister said that, Rupert Murdoch has done huge damage to democracy because it's not just him, of course, but because of this sort of emotion manipulating aspect to this political infotainment that we have now. We don't really have news, we have political infotainment. And we need to get back to where we have a robust journalism that people can count on. Then we can hold our politicians accountable, because if our certified news sites say that this politician either lied or he greatly exaggerated, okay, we'll give that politician or the aspiring politician the chance to correct themselves. But if they don't correct themselves and they continue lying, then they should be disqualified. Just like
Right.
a job interviewee would be disqualified if they were lying during a job interview.
Well, I think for the most part, once a congressperson, a House of Representatives, Congress, whatever, once they get elected to office, like you said, there's no term limits, which we desperately need to set, and it's like they're insulated for life. They're
Yes.
how many millionaires do we have in Congress?
Well, that's exactly right.
And how many of them were millionaires when they started? A lot of them weren't.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
They got lobbyists that are lining their pockets with cash to get them to pass laws that the rest of us normal folks would go, what?
Exactly. They're working. It's become a government of the career politicians, by the career politicians, and for the special interests. And the thing is that once they get in office, especially in Congress, it's a 2-year, they're basically in constant campaign mode. And they're spending, they spend at least a half their time just raising funds, attending political events. And so this is another thing. If you hired somebody for a 2-year contract and they were spending half their time
looking for another job,
looking for another job, you wouldn't be very happy. So the only way to get them concentrated on the job is you say, okay, there is no reelection. You're not going to be, so there's no point in being in campaign mode. And not only that, you can't even run for another office till 2 years after this term ends. And so this is your one chance to make your mark on history. This is your one chance to make a difference, in this country. You can choose to blow it, to waste it, or you can choose to try to make your mark.
What they have lost sight of is that they are servants to their constituents. They're elected by their constituents to office to serve the people.
Exactly.
To serve the needs of the people and help to alleviate some of these social issues that are affecting all of us.
Exactly. And, the thing is, instead of working for special interests, they should be working for the general interest. And
right.
So, this, and how many times have you heard, well, this politician is not up for reelection so they can vote their conscience? And you're thinking, well, gosh, shouldn't they always be voting their conscience?
Yeah.
Why is it only when they, when they're not running for reelection, then they say actually what they really believe? And so I'm sorry, I got a little interruption there. So this is, it all comes down to a vicious addiction to power. For example, that's what George W. Bush said. Power is very addictive. And John Boehner, the former House Speaker, said, you give people a little power and it completely changes them. Just like if you've ever known somebody who gets terribly addicted to something, it completely changes them because the addiction becomes the priority.
Yeah, they have power, prestige, and money, right?
Yeah, and all the perks, and it goes to their head, and it just as it does with it's throughout history. I mean, this is why whether we're talking about our own politicians or whether you talk about Vladimir Putin or the Taliban or the Ayatollahs or the Chinese Communist Party, people, they get power and they don't want to give it up. So James, if you were if I were a doctor and you were my patient and I had to give you a highly addictive medication, well, what's the way to prevent you from getting addicted to it? Well, you give it to you in small portions spread apart. And that's exactly how power has to be allocated. Small portions spread apart.
Well, and I would hope that you as my physician would not prescribe something to me that is highly addictive to begin with.
Well, just suppose, though, that for some reason we have to give it to you.
Sure.
Like an opioid of some sort or, some painkiller. Ideally, you would never, in fact, I had knee surgery a number of years ago, and I didn't take the opioids that they gave me. I just kind of manned my way through it with a Tylenol. But the thing is that sometimes an addictive painkiller is necessary. But we're just going to talk hypothetically here. Suppose I had some medication that was highly addictive, but I don't want you to get addicted to it. Okay, I'm going to give you a small portion. You take it, and then you wait a sufficient amount of time before you take your second one.
So instead of giving me 60 pills, you're going to give me like 7.
Or just maybe even just one at a time. Nick, I'll give you one this week. You come in next week, I'll give you another.
There you go.
Yeah, and so that's exactly because when we talk about one of the big problems is that we have the power concentrated in these career politicians who work hand in glove with the special interests that help keep them in power. And what we believe is that once our politicians are working for us and they're not working for the special interests, the freedom will come, greater freedom and greater prosperity. Our market economy will work the way it is instead of having our politicians play favorites in the marketplace. Because, if you don't believe we have favorites, just look at the god-awful tax code we have.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. It's absolutely insane. And that whole tax code, this is another thing. We just get rid of it and start from scratch. Simple, fair, no special interest crap written in there.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the solution party, but before we do that, I want to talk about liberty a little bit, and I want to talk about, or I want you to help me to define what liberty is and what constitutes liberty.
Well, I've lived, like I said, in a communist country, and I've seen, what it's like for people who are basically under the thumb of a despotic regime, a despotic regime that has all the power and that the people cannot do anything about it. And, let me just say this, talking about liberty, one of the things that's most important is being able to choose who or what your government is going to do and who your representatives are going to be.
Right.
And, right now, one of the things that we have to look at is history. And throughout 99.99% of human history, nations have been governed by small groups, or by monarchs, kings, emperors, warlords, theocrats. And the democracy we have now is a great experiment where we take it out of the hands of the few and we give it to the people. In the old days, for example, they had this notion of divine right of kings, that these people who are our rulers are there because they have some God-granted right. Well, there are a lot of people, I think, for example, the autocrats in this world, who want to destroy democracy. They want to go back to a time when small groups of elites or despots, kings, royal families, you name it, ruled the nations. And the problem is the technology exists now that if democracy collapses, the technology exists to ensure that it can never come back, because they can monitor all of our movements, all of our conversations. They can analyze them automatically through AI. And so this whole notion of democracy, this whole notion of freedom, of liberty, the freedom to choose who your representatives are and how you want your government to work is in grave danger now. And these things that we take, I don't want to say take for granted, but these things that we enjoy, like elections and the freedom to travel. In communist China, you couldn't travel. I mean, they would see if you wanted to go see somebody in a different city, it's like you had to get permission, and many times they wouldn't give it. It's like, why do you want to go to this city? So all of these things that
So I'm thinking liberty kind of encapsulates, and I'm talking about here in America, liberty kind of encapsulates freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right? What are some of these other freedoms that we enjoy and maybe take for granted?
Yeah, but you know what the most critical one is? As a Chinese individual once told me, that the greatest thing they love about living in America is having the liberty to think freely. Because in these other countries, they don't want you to think freely. And one of the great things, one of the most dangerous things that's potentially going to happen, besides the surveillance technology, is that there's an article in Scientific American not too long ago that they're developing the technology that will be realized before too long to be able to read people's thoughts. Now, that has some useful applications, but you know what happens is that the people who want the power, or the people who are in power, especially in these despotic countries, they're going to use that technology to cement their lock on power. And this is why even the freedom of thought is in danger. Now, the way we address that is we have to make sure that power can never be concentrated, especially like right now where we're talking about in the hands of the career politicians and their special interests. And we also have to work toward a world free of autocracies, because autocracies will always use technology in the worst way possible to cement their own lock on power. Now, Ronald Reagan in 1982, he said, it's time to throw the communist system onto the ash heap of history. And everybody laughed. Everybody thought, what's this guy smoking? But within 10 years, the Soviet Union collapsed. And why did it collapse? Because of the freedom and prosperity gap that existed between us, our Western allies, and the wretched East Bloc countries, including the Soviet Union. Right. And that's exactly the same formula we have to have for destroying or for defeating the autocrats. We get our own act together, ever freer, ever more prosperous, not only us, but our allies. That freedom and prosperity gap will eventually crush the autocracies, because that's the world we have to aim for. There's nobody, as Ronald Reagan said, nobody wants to live under the thumb of a bully. And right now, sadly, the autocrats are making a lot of progress because people are getting disillusioned with democracy, not only here, but in South America, where I am, because of all the corruption and the corrupt politicians. And so getting our act together here is crucial, not only for us, but for the world, because we have to lead by the power of our example. And our first step for doing that is getting rid of the career politicians, putting time limits on our political parties, getting our journalism where it needs to be.
So let me ask a couple of these questions. You have some really good questions on your profile. How can systemic political change support constitutional liberties?
Well, one of the things that's, when we talk about the constitutional liberties, one of the key things, one of the most important thing is making our judiciary credible again, because inevitably anything that comes down to the Constitution comes down to how the judicial branch of our government is going to interpret it in ways that ensure our freedom. One of the problems with our judiciary now is that it's become so politicized. Instead, our politicians, instead of working to make our judiciary independent of politics, they try to fill the courts with basically political appointees. And that's why nobody has credibility. Nobody believes in the credibility of our judiciary anymore, because, that's an Obama judge. Well, that's a Trump judge. And so it's terrible for our democracy because people. And so one of the ways to ensure that our Constitution, that people believe in the judiciary branch, which is crucial to enforcing our Constitution, because they're the ones who will make judgment of whether a law or an action by the executive branch or by Congress is constitutional or not. We have to have a credible judiciary. And getting a credible judiciary means you get the politics out of it. And you actually seek to get a good variety of judicial philosophies into our judiciary. Anthony Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they were completely on the opposite ends of the spectrum when it came to judicial philosophy, but they were good friends because they understood that it was the diversity of their ideas actually made the Supreme Court stronger. The debate. You want our judges debating the different points of view and exchanging ideas, because that serves us better. And that is so crucial to ensuring that our Constitution is always interpreted in a neutral way. Interpreted in a neutral way is crucial to our liberty, because otherwise you don't want a political party interpreting the Constitution, because they will always interpret it in ways that benefit them.
Right, exactly. So what do you see as the link between government reform and individual rights?
Well, we all want freedom. We all want individual rights. But the thing is that we also have to recognize that we live we don't exist alone. We have to have laws so that people can live together. Just like the roads, you can't go driving down a residential street at 120 miles an hour. We have laws, so that's an imposition on individual freedom, but it's because it protects the rights of people to walk down the sidewalk without having to worry about some guy careening down the residential street at 120 miles an hour.
So the absence of law and order is what? Chaos.
Yeah, exactly. But, we want to have
Or anarchy.
Yeah, and we've had anarchy for 99% of human history, and, we didn't exactly advance very much during that.
Right.
So, we want to have an effective government and laws that, protect our freedom, but at the same time, don't allow irresponsible people to cause damage. I mean, in the final analysis, what is freedom? What is liberty? It's really the freedom to act responsibly. If people acted responsibly on their own, we wouldn't need any laws, or very few. But because some people will not respect the traffic laws and will drive imprudently if there are no laws, then we have to put in, well, this street has a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, and you got to follow that. But, you've always got to get a balance between, keeping things orderly, but at the same time, ensuring that people are not being imposed upon in an inappropriate way.
Right. Okay. Let's see. How might international perspectives on democracy inform U.S. political improvements?
Well, one of the big things, that comes to mind when we talk about this is corruption. I work in South America. I've been in Japan, China, and one of the things that's common in all of these places is corruption. Corruption is a worldwide cancer. And corruption anywhere, as it turns out, is a threat to prosperity and freedom everywhere, I believe. Because, for example, one of the reasons we have a refugee crisis is because people are fleeing terrible corruption. This corruption that exists worldwide, not only in South America, but, for example, locks people into poverty. Like Peru, for example, is a very rich country in terms of natural resources, in terms of tourism opportunities, but so many people live in poverty. Why do they do that? Why are living in poverty? Because the politicians are so corrupt. And so it's very important for us to work together. What I call it is a war on corruption. It has to address corruption everywhere, including here in this country. And so I think that one of the things we can learn from overseas perspectives is that the corruption that is plaguing these places is a danger to us. And also it should spur us to address corruption in our own country. One of the things that, for example, that I find, let's just talk about, how the money being spent at the Pentagon. It's just a feeding frenzy of the politicians, they send blank checks to the Pentagon. What happens if you send a blank check to any bureaucracy? Well, they're going to spend it,
Sure.
And, so there's just I believe a lot of corruption there that needs to be addressed, because every dollar should be thought of as a precious natural resource.
Right.
And then let's look at gerrymandering. It's just as corrupt as can be when, politicians are selecting their voters instead of the other way around. Ronald Reagan talked about the evils of gerrymandering, and others have too. And why do we accept that they do these kludge, these voting areas together to ensure that one politician or one party is always going to be voted into power? And that is a great disservice to us as a country, because it takes away the competition of ideas. We want our politicians out there actually competing. We don't want to have any shoo-ins.
Right. So describe gerrymandering and how that works, because I'm not sure I really understand that.
Well, gerrymandering is when the state legislature, for example, they will draw the boundaries of, for example, this will be our state's first congressional district. This will be our state's second congressional district.
Oh, okay.
This will be our state's third congressional district. Well, what they do is if you look at the gerrymander, what these districts are drawn in such a way that it's just completely, you would think it would be just something nice and rectangular or something like that. It looks like some sort of weird lake. They try to get, for example, if they're gerrymandering to favor Republicans, they will try to squeeze as many of the Democratic ones into a small zone so that they can get as many Republican voting districts allocated as possible. And in blue states, they do exactly the same thing, but just switching the colors. Right. So the idea is to basically ensure that one party wins as many districts as possible. So they draw these congressional districts in ways that help ensure that. And, I think that's just disgustingly corrupt, because what happens is these politicians, then they have no reason to compete. They have no reason they're just automatically, elected. There is no competition of ideas. And so they can take on the most extreme points of view possible, and nobody holds their feet to the fire because they're automatically going to be. In fact, in some cases, they don't even run opposed. They run unopposed.
Right. It's messed up. And I would like to say that corruption doesn't just happen at the federal level here in America.
Oh, of course not.
Local, state, county.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And That's why what I was talking about earlier about having this national press fund to fund local journalism in these small towns, because we don't have small town journalism anymore. But that was one of the best watchdogs to keep tabs on local corruption. And if you don't have that, it's going to be a feeding frenzy of corruption too. It's just sad. But unfortunately, when the cat's away, the mice will play.
Yeah, here in South Carolina, we have an organization called Conservatruth. Sounds just like it is spelled, Conservatruth, and they are a political watchdog activist organization that they literally read through all the bills that are pre-filed in Columbia, South Carolina, and they break them down. They summarize them, and they tell us little people, us as citizens, hey, this is the bill, this is the number, and this is what they say on the outside. This is the pretty little package they put a bow on.
Uh-huh.
But if you read the bill and all the garbage that's in it, it really isn't doing what it's like they're handing you a piece of chocolate with a bow on it, going, taste that tastes good, and this is what it's going to do for you. But you don't know what the filling is, right?
Right.
Until you break that thing open and look at it and go, oh my God, the chocolate's on the outside, but there's poison on the inside.
Right.
This is not good for us, right?
Right.
And so anyway, I like Conservatruth because they're doing that, and we need more of that all across America.
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, the local journalism, for example, a small town city government decides they're going to build a new library, for example, and then you look into it, and the company mainly responsible happens to be the mayor's brother-in-law, and they've budgeted $5 million for a project that probably should cost, maybe $3 million. And where's that extra money going? These questions, need to be asked. You have to put a spotlight on these things. And that's what local journalists do. And that's why we need to bring back our small town journalism as well as journalism in general.
So one of the great ways to root out corruption is follow the money.
Oh, yes.
If you want to find out where the corruption is and why things are happening the way they are, follow the money.
Yeah, well, I like to say follow the money and follow the political careers or the political interests, because
right,
these it a lot of times ends up being kind of a quid pro quo, where the politician they get the contract and they get a kickback, and they also get support for their reelection. They get all the razzle dazzle marketing, that gets people just automatically voting for them. Right. And we got to have them. We got to put a spotlight on all these things.
So why do you believe politicians are the primary impediment to progress?
Well, as I said, the problem is that power is addictive. And once our politicians get into power, that becomes their priority. And so getting reelected, doing what they have to advance their party's interests, and our interests, the people's interests, become secondary. For example, when Biden was president, or here now, you have the Congress basically just rubber stamping what the president wants. Because why do they do that? Because they're so afraid of being primaried. The most frightening word for a politician is primaried. Now, just as when Biden was president, and now, there are probably a lot of Republicans, like now, who will privately tell you that, they don't like the way this is, but they don't want to oppose it because they don't want to get primaried. And the same thing with Biden. And, that should not be their primary consideration. They should be voting according to what, they really feel is right. And they should be proposing ideas. They should be critiquing things, critiquing whatever the president is proposing, honestly. And they should be independent of party. A Democrat should be able to say, yeah, I like this idea that Trump is proposing. But now they won't do that because they're afraid of being primaried. And a Republican won't critique what Trump is proposing because they're afraid of being primary. And this happens every time. So our Congress are filled with politicians whose first priority is
to stay in power.
Yeah, just staying in power. And so if we really want our politicians to work for us, you have to there has to be that you're not going to get another chance. So you might as well work, the way you feel is best right. You might as well endorse or push the ideas that we endorsed when we voted for you, and not think about reelection, because reelection is not on the table. So just do your job, make your mark, and then move on.
Right. All right. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for an elevator speech for the Solution Party.
Okay. Well, if I had to say anything, I would say, right now in this day and age, this great what we believe is this great experiment in democracy is really under threat. And it's under threat because there are a lot of people in this world, autocrats and very powerful people who want to return the world to a point where nations were ruled by small groups of elite, as it has been through 99.99% of human history. So the problem is if our democracy fails and we go back to a time where very small groups of powerful people rule us, the technology exists where they will never be challenged. So it's crucial that we get our house in order when it comes to our democracy. Now, what is plaguing our democracy more than anything right now? It's our, number one, it's our career politicians, our politicians who place more priority on staying in office and advancing their partisan interests than they do on working for you. And because of this, our elections and our politics have devolved into a circus of lies and emotion manipulation. There are a number of challenges that our country has, and we can address those challenges. We can solve those challenges. But step number one is getting rid of the notion of career politician, having our elections be about ideas, a competition of ideas, instead of tribal warfare based on emotion manipulation, getting people riled up, and just saying anything to get elected, or just saying anything to stay in office. Once we have our politicians who are working for us, we can get our house together. Our democracy can begin to achieve its potential. And once our democracy starts to achieve its potential, our economy will start to achieve its potential. That means more prosperity for everybody. We can have an opportunity-rich economy that will bring prosperity, widespread prosperity to all corners of the country. But it involves, first step, getting rid of our re-election-obsessed, power-addicted politicians.
So for my listening audience, how would they get involved in the Solution Party if they're listening to this podcast episode and this is something that interests them, which I can't think for 1 second why it wouldn't? How would they get involved?
Well, we have called on our website join@solutionsparty.org. Let's start. If you send me an email, we'll start having video conferences. We'll start talking about how we can organize, how we can take these ideas. Now, this is all about right ideas. I want to emphasize this is not right or left. We believe that they're good ideas across the political spectrum. Our greatest strength are our ideas. A civil discussion of our ideas, refining our ideas, and promoting our ideas. And what we're trying to do is we want to get to the point where we actually establish a Solution Party here in Oregon, and then we want to take it nationwide. And the only requirement is if you're going to run as a Solution Party candidate, you got to promise you're only going to serve one term. You're not going to run for another office while you're serving that term. And we have, other ideas to address the different problems plaguing our country, our journalism, our judiciary, our political parties. You don't have to exactly follow those ideas, but the point is that we want to bring an end to political parties as we know them. We want to make our journalism robust. We want to make our judiciary trustworthy again. Whatever your ideas you have, share them. We're all ears. And if you run as a Solutions Party candidate, like I say, the only requirement is that you promise to not run for election. You're going to dedicate yourself 100% to doing your job and then moving on.
Well, sounds good. Evan, I appreciate you being on the podcast episode tonight or this evening. I like what you had to say, and I think we're in agreement on a lot of stuff. And I wish you a lot of luck in your endeavors there.
Well, I have enjoyed this greatly, and I hope that we can do it again sometime soon. We have a lot of topics. We have a lot of topics to talk about, and this is how we're going to change the country, having good discussions about the state of things and coming up with ideas to make things better.
Right, I agree. All right, so to my listening audience, I'll say thank you for the privilege of your time. I appreciate you listening to this podcast episode. Our podcast is hosted on Captivate.fm, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. The video portion of this podcast is going to be hosted on Rumble.com, which is a conservative alternative to YouTube. You can contact me at Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. That's Liberty Gun Rights Podcast at proton.me. And thank you for listening, and everybody have a wonderful evening. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, James.